They expected the Duke to remain silent when she walked past the War Council table. What no one expected was for her to stop, lean forward over the maps his generals had spent hours perfecting, and say in a voice that carried effortlessly across the marble chamber, "Forgive me, Your Grace, but if you march your men through that valley, you will lose half of them before noon." And in that single impossible moment, Duke Lucien Graves realized that the quiet maid pouring wine behind him understood warfare better than every decorated officer in the room. The morning had begun like every other since the border conflicts erupted. Blackstone Keep's war room filled before dawn with commanders, advisors, and nobles whose loyalty mattered more than their tactical skill. The Duke stood at the head of the table as he always did, composed and cold, his presence filling the space not through volume, but through an authority so absolute that even experienced generals chose their words carefully around him. Duke Lucien Graves had inherited command at 26, younger than tradition preferred, but more capable than anyone dared dispute. He did not lead through charm or politics. He led through precision. Every order calculated, every risk measured, every weakness identified and eliminated before it could spread. His soldiers followed him not because they loved him, but because under his command they survived battles that should have destroyed them. And yet, as autumn deepened and enemy forces pressed harder against his territory, even his legendary control could not hide the strain beginning to show. The maps spread before them detailed a valley approach that would cut travel time significantly and position his forces advantageably for a decisive engagement. Lord General Carth had proposed it confidently, tracing routes with practiced ease while other officers nodded agreement. The plan was sound, efficient, exactly the kind of maneuver the Duke himself might have designed, which was why no one questioned it. Servants moved quietly along the walls, refilling glasses, replacing candles, existing as they were trained to exist, invisibly. Among them, Elira Moss carried a silver pitcher with the same unremarkable precision she brought to every task. She had been at Blackstone Keep only 3 months, transferred from a smaller estate after demonstrating unusual competence in managing complex household logistics. She spoke rarely, worked efficiently, and had never once drawn the Duke's direct attention. Until now, as she moved behind the Duke's chair to refill Lord General Carth's wine, her gaze drifted across the maps laid open on the table. She did not mean to look closely. Servants were taught to see without observing, to be present without witnessing. But something in the terrain markings caught her attention, held it, and within seconds her mind began assembling patterns the commanders had somehow overlooked. She hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to remain silent. She was a maid. They were generals. The hierarchy was absolute. But the longer she stared at those maps, the clearer the trap became. The Duke's voice cut through her thoughts. "We advance at first light. 3 battalions through the valley, cavalry support on the ridges." Questions. Silence answered him, not because the plan was flawless, but because no one dared challenge the Duke when he spoke with such finality. Elira's hand tightened on the pitcher handle. She could see it so clearly now. The narrow pass, the elevation advantages, the perfect killing ground the enemy had prepared. If she said nothing, hundreds of men would die. If she spoke, she would be dismissed instantly, possibly worse. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she made a choice that would change everything. "Forgive me, Your Grace." The room went utterly still. Conversations died mid-word. Every head turned. The Duke's gaze found her immediately, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. His expression revealed nothing, but the quality of his attention shifted into something far more dangerous than anger, focus. "You have something to contribute?" His voice was soft, which somehow made the question more cutting. Elira forced herself to meet his eyes, though everything in her wanted to retreat. "If you march your men through that valley, Your Grace, you will lose half of them before noon." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Lord General Carth's face darkened instantly. "How dare you?" The Duke raised one hand, and Carth fell silent immediately. "Explain," the Duke said quietly, his gaze never leaving Elira. She stepped forward slowly, setting the pitcher down with hands that only trembled slightly. Then she did something no servant had ever done in that room. She leaned over the war table and pointed directly at the map. "Here." Her finger traced the valley entrance. The pass narrows to less than 50 yards. Your scouts reported it clear, but look at the tree line. Old growth forest on both sides, dense enough to conceal archer positions. And here, she shifted to the far ridge. The elevation gives them perfect range over the entire approach. You would be boxed in with no cover and no retreat. One of the younger officers leaned forward, squinting at the map. His expression changed. Lord General Carth's face flushed. Your Grace, this is absurd. She's a servant. She cannot possibly. She just did. The Duke interrupted softly. His eyes remained fixed on Alira with an intensity that made her breath catch. Continue. Alira's mind raced, but her voice steadied. The enemy knew you would see the tactical advantage. They made it obvious. But if you approach instead from the eastern ridge, the longer route your advisors dismissed, you gain the high ground and force them into open terrain where your cavalry superiority matters. The room held its breath, and Duke Lucien Graves, who had spent his entire life trusting only what could be proven, looked at the map again with eyes that suddenly saw everything differently. The silence stretched until Lord General Carth could no longer contain himself. Your Grace, we cannot possibly entertain strategic counsel from a maid who likely cannot even read properly, let alone interpret military formations. He gestured dismissively toward Alira. She has overstepped grotesquely and should be removed from this chamber immediately. Several officers nodded agreement, relief evident in their expressions. Because if Alira was right, it meant they had all missed something catastrophically obvious. The Duke did not respond to Carth. Instead, he studied the map with renewed focus, his finger tracing the exact path Alira had indicated. The longer he looked, the tighter his jaw became. Captain Varick, he said quietly, you led the scouting party through that valley yesterday. Describe the tree line again. The young captain straightened nervously. Dense, Your Grace. Old growth. We noted it in the report, but assessed no immediate threat since we saw no enemy movement. Because you were looking for movement, Alira said softly, before she could stop herself. Not positions. Every eye turned to her again, but she pressed forward, knowing she had already crossed too many lines to retreat now. Archers do not need to move if they are already in place. A force could have been stationed there for days, waiting. The forest provides complete concealment until the moment they loose arrows into a trapped column. Captain Varick's face drained of color. My God, she's right. We checked for active patrols, not embedded positions. Lord General Carth slammed his hand on the table. This is madness. Your Grace, I have served your family for 20 years. I have won battles across 3 territories. You cannot seriously consider. I am considering, the Duke interrupted, his voice carrying a sharp edge now. Why none of my experienced commanders saw what a maid identified in 30 seconds. The insult landed like a blade. Several officers shifted uncomfortably. The Duke turned to Alira fully for the first time, and the weight of his attention felt overwhelming. Where did you learn to read tactical maps? The question was not rhetorical. He expected an answer. Alira hesitated, aware that truth carried its own dangers. My father was a cartographer, Your Grace. He worked for the Northern Campaign 15 years ago. I grew up reading terrain surveys and troop movement projections. He believed geography told stories if you knew how to listen. Your father's name? Mathis Moss, Your Grace. He died at the Siege of Grey March. Something flickered across the Duke's expression, recognition, perhaps, or respect. Mathis Moss drew the maps that saved the northern flank. His work was brilliant. Yes, Your Grace. And he taught you. He taught me everything. The Duke looked at her for one moment longer, then turned back to his commanders. We changed the approach. Eastern Ridge, as she suggested. Captain Varick, take a second scouting team through the valley tonight under cover. If you find enemy archer positions, report immediately. We march at dawn, but not where they expect us. Lord General Carth looked apoplectic. Your Grace, I must protest. Your protest is noted and dismissed, the Duke said coldly. If you wish to retain your position, you will execute the revised strategy without further complaint. The general's mouth worked soundlessly before he managed a stiff nod. The Duke's gaze swept the room. Dismissed. All of you. Officers filed out quickly, casting uncertain glances toward Alira as they passed. Within moments, the chamber emptied until only 2 people remained. Alira stood frozen beside the table, heart pounding, waiting for the reprimand she knew must come. Servants did not embarrass generals. Servants did not correct nobility. She had broken every rule that kept people like her safe. The Duke moved around the table slowly, stopping a few feet away. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall, sharp-featured, with eyes that missed nothing. You made Lord General Carth look incompetent in front of the entire War Council, he said quietly. I know, Your Grace. I am sorry. Do not apologize for being right. His voice softened just slightly. But understand that you have made yourself visible now. That carries consequences. Elira lifted her chin, meeting his gaze despite the fear curling in her chest. If the consequence is saving lives, Your Grace, I accept it. Something changed in his expression then. Not warmth exactly, but a reassessment, as though he were seeing her clearly for the first time and finding something unexpected. You will attend the next War Council, he said. Elira blinked. Your Grace. Not as a servant, as a strategic advisor. He gestured toward the maps. If your father taught you to read terrain this well, I want that skill in this room when decisions are made. Refuse if you wish, but know that I do not offer this lightly. Her breath caught. The generals will never accept. The generals will accept what I tell them to accept, the Duke interrupted firmly. The question is whether you will accept. This will not be easy. You will be questioned, doubted, resented. But if you see another trap like this one, I need you to speak. Do you understand? Elira's mind raced. Everything about this was impossible, unprecedented, dangerous. And yet, standing in that war room with maps spread before her, and the Duke of Blackstone Keep waiting for her answer, she realized something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She did not want to go back to being invisible. Yes, Your Grace, she said quietly. I understand. The Duke nodded once, then turned back toward the maps. But before she could leave, his voice stopped her. Elira. It was the first time he had used her name. Your Grace. Thank you, he said, still facing the maps. You may have saved this campaign. And as she left the war room, Elira understood that everything had just changed. Not just for her, but for both of them. Captain Varick's scouting report arrived 3 hours before dawn, and it confirmed everything Elira had predicted. Enemy archers, over 200 strong, positioned throughout the valley tree line in concealed platforms. A cavalry unit hidden in the northern ravine, ready to cut off any retreat. It was a massacre waiting to happen, and the Duke's entire force would have walked directly into it. By the time the War Council reconvened, the mood had shifted entirely. Officers who had dismissed Elira with contempt now watched her with wary respect. Lord General Carth looked like he had aged a decade overnight, his earlier arrogance replaced by tight-lipped silence. The Duke stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. The revised approach proceeds as planned. We take the eastern ridge at first light. The enemy will be watching an empty valley while we claim the high ground behind them. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before landing deliberately on Elira. This victory, if we achieve it, will be due to Miss Moss's tactical observation. I suggest we all remember that competence is not determined by title. The words hung in the air like a command no one dared challenge. The battle itself unfolded exactly as Elira had foreseen. The Duke's forces swept down from the eastern ridge while the enemy waited uselessly in the valley trap they had prepared. Caught between superior elevation and open terrain, the opposing commander surrendered before midday. Not a single one of the Duke's soldiers died. When the Duke returned to Blackstone Keep that evening, still in field armor, he went directly to the library where Elira had been studying updated border maps. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment neither spoke. It worked, he said simply. I am glad, Your Grace. He moved closer, stopping beside the table where dozens of charts lay spread in organized chaos. You have been reviewing supply routes. Yes, Your Grace. I thought if the eastern border remains unstable, you will need faster resupply lines. I marked 3 alternatives that reduce travel time without compromising security. The Duke studied the maps, then studied her. You did this in 1 afternoon. My father taught me efficiency, Your Grace. Your father taught you brilliance. He paused, something softening in his usually severe expression. I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear. Do you know how rare it is to meet someone who tells me what I need to know? Elira's breath caught. Your Grace. Lucien, he interrupted quietly. When we are alone, you may call me Lucien. The informality shocked her more than anything that had come before. That would not be appropriate. Neither is appointing a maid to my war council, yet I did it because it was right. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. You save lives, Alira. Not through rank or title or politics, but through courage and intelligence. You stood in a room full of powerful men and refused to let them make a catastrophic mistake. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? I only did what needed to be done. Exactly. His gaze held hers with an intensity that made her heart race. So did I, when I made you my advisor. And I am doing it again now, when I tell you that I do not want you to disappear back into invisibility. I want you here, at this table, speaking freely. I want your mind working beside mine. I want. He stopped himself, but the unfinished sentence hung between them like something fragile and dangerous. Alira's voice emerged barely above a whisper. What do you want? For a long moment, the Duke, Lucien, simply looked at her. And then, slowly, carefully, as though approaching something precious he feared might shatter, he reached out and took her hand. I want to stop pretending that the only thing remarkable about you is your tactical skill, he said quietly. When you walked out of that war room, I could not stop thinking about the way you stood your ground, the way you refused to be dismissed, the way you saw what no one else could see. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. I have spent years believing that distance kept me strong. But watching you these past days, I realize I have mistaken isolation for strength. And I do not want to make that mistake anymore. Alira's eyes filled, though she fought to keep her voice steady. Your world will not accept this. I am nobody. You saved my army, he interrupted firmly. You exposed flaws in my command structure that could have cost us the entire campaign. You possess a strategic mind that rivals the finest officers in the realm. You are not nobody, Alira. You never were. The only mistake was that I did not see you sooner. And if I stay, she whispered, if I remain at your side, what happens when society demands you choose someone appropriate? His hand tightened on hers. Then society will learn that I already have. The words settled between them with quiet finality, and Alira realized he was not offering her a hidden place in shadows. He was offering her everything, openly, impossibly, at a cost he clearly understood but refused to let matter. They will call me ambitious, she said softly. They will say I manipulated you. Let them. His voice carried absolute certainty. I have spent my life earning respect through victory. If people doubt my judgment now, I will prove them wrong the same way I always have, through results. And you, Alira Moss, are the finest strategic decision I have ever made. She laughed then, a sound caught between tears and disbelief. You were supposed to be cold and calculating. I am, he said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. This is calculated. You make me better. You make my command stronger. And beyond all strategy and reason, you make me want to stop being the man who only sees the world through maps and battles. Alira looked down at their joined hands, at the impossibility of a duke holding a maid's hand as though it were the most natural thing in the world. And she realized that everything her father had taught her about reading terrain, about seeing patterns others missed, had led her to this moment. Yes, she said quietly. Yes. Yes, I will stay. Yes, I will stand beside you. Yes to all of it. The relief that crossed Lucien's face was so raw, so unguarded, that it transformed him entirely. And when he pulled her closer, when his forehead rested gently against hers, it felt like the completion of something that had begun the moment she dared to speak in that war room. 6 months later, when Alira Moss became the Duchess of Blackstone Keep, the ceremony was attended by nobles who still whispered behind their fans. But it was also attended by every soldier who had survived the Valley campaign, men who understood exactly what her courage had given them. And years afterward, when historians wrote about Duke Lucien Graves' legendary military successes, they noted with confusion that his strategies grew sharper, his victories more decisive, after appointing an unknown advisor whose name appeared in no military records. But those who served at Blackstone Keep knew the truth. They had seen the Duke and Duchess standing together over war maps late into the night, two brilliant minds working as one. They had watched a Maid become a commander, and a cold dupe become a man who finally understood that true strength was not found in isolation, but in recognizing worth wherever it appeared, and choosing it, no matter the cost.